You're lying inside a tent. It's the middle of the night. The forest around you is completely silent. Not quiet. Silent. No insects. No wind. Nothing. And for some reason, you're awake. You don't know what woke you up. But something feels wrong. You stay still inside your sleeping bag, listening. Then you hear it. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Right outside the tent. They circle once. Then they stop. And through the thin fabric of the tent, you can see a shadow, standing there, completely still. That's when you realize something. Whatever is outside your tent knows you're inside, and it's waiting. Tonight I'm going to share 3 disturbing camping horror stories. Stories submitted by people who went out into the woods and experienced something they still can't explain. So if you're planning a camping trip anytime soon, you might want to keep the lights on for this one. Camping is supposed to be peaceful. You drive away from the city, away from noise, away from people. You set up a tent, build a fire, and spend the night surrounded by nothing but trees. Most of the time, that's exactly how it goes. Quiet, relaxing, normal. But sometimes, being miles away from civilization means something else. If something strange happens out there, there's no one around to help you. These are 3 disturbing camping horror stories. This story was submitted by a guy named Marcus. At the time, he was 27. He decided to take a solo camping trip to a state park in eastern Tennessee. It wasn't his first time going there. In fact, he'd done the exact same trail twice before. 3 miles in, camp for the night, then hike back the next morning. Simple. He left on a Friday afternoon after work. By the time he reached the trailhead, the sun was already starting to go down. Marcus grabbed his backpack and started hiking. The trail was quiet. The weather was cool but comfortable. And within about an hour, he reached the same clearing he'd camped in before. There was a small creek nearby, plenty of flat ground for a tent. It felt familiar, comfortable. He set up his tent, built a small fire, cooked some food, and just sat there for a while listening to the woods. Around 9 that night, he noticed something strange. Across the creek, maybe 60 yards away, there was another campfire. He hadn't seen it when he arrived, but the trees were dense enough that it could have easily been hidden. Marcus didn't think much of it. The park allowed camping in that area. Other hikers probably had the same idea he did. He watched the fire for a few minutes, but something about it felt odd. He couldn't see anyone sitting near it. No silhouettes, no movement. Just a fire burning in the dark. Eventually, Marcus shrugged it off and went to sleep. He woke up suddenly at 1:47 a.m. He knew the exact time because the first thing he did was check his phone. Something had pulled him awake. At first he thought maybe it was the creek or the wind. But then he heard it. Someone laughing, not close, but somewhere out in the woods. A thin, drifting laugh. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then it stopped. Marcus sat up in his sleeping bag and listened. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. Then suddenly, the laughing started again. Same sound, same direction. Marcus tried to convince himself it was the other campers. People sometimes stay up late around fires. Maybe someone told a joke. Maybe they'd been drinking. But the laugh sounded wrong. Too thin, too slow. Almost like someone forcing it. The sound continued on and off for over an hour. It would stop for several minutes, then start again. Every time sounding exactly the same. Marcus didn't sleep. Eventually, around 3 in the morning, the laughing stopped. The woods became quiet again, and sometime close to 4, Marcus finally drifted back to sleep. When he woke up the next morning, sunlight was already coming through the trees. Everything felt normal again. He made coffee, packed up some gear, then walked down to the creek to refill his water bottle. And that's when he looked across, at the other campsite. The fire was out. That part made sense. But something else didn't. There was no tent, no backpack, no sleeping bag, no gear of any kind. Marcus crossed the creek to get a closer look. The fire pit was still there, a circle of stones, ash in the center. Someone had definitely built a fire. But that was it. The ground was soft from rain earlier in the week. There should have been footprints everywhere, but there weren't any. Not a single one. Marcus stood there for almost a full minute staring at the empty campsite, trying to figure out how someone could have been there all night and without leaving any sign they'd ever existed. He packed up his camp shortly after that and started hiking back toward the trailhead. Marcus told me that during the entire hike out, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was walking behind him, just out of sight. He never turned around. He didn't want to see what might be there. Marcus has never gone back to that trail, but sometimes, when he's trying to fall asleep at night, he still hears that laugh, somewhere out in the woods. Most strange experiences while camping end quickly. You hear something unusual, maybe see someone passing through the trees, and then it's over. But the next story is different, because in this case, when the person outside the campsite never left. Priya said she woke up because something felt wrong. Not a sound, not movement, just that strange feeling you get when someone is nearby, the kind of feeling that pulls you out of sleep. She opened her eyes slowly inside the tent. The fire outside had burned down to glowing embers. The campsite was dark, quiet, completely still. And then she noticed something. Dana was awake too, sitting up slightly in her sleeping bag, staring toward the tent door. Her hand suddenly reached over and grabbed Priya's arm, hard. Dana leaned close to her ear and whispered one thing: "Don't move." Priya immediately froze. The tone in Dana's voice was enough to make her heart start pounding. It wasn't panic. It was worse. It was controlled fear. The kind of fear that means you're trying very hard not to alert something that you're awake. Priya slowly turned her head toward the tent door, and that's when she saw him, a figure standing outside their campsite, completely still, watching their tent. Priya and her friend Dana had planned the camping trip weeks earlier. They both worked stressful office jobs in Chicago, and the idea of getting away for a long weekend sounded perfect. They picked a campground in northern Michigan. It wasn't remote wilderness. It was a normal campground, designated sites, bathrooms, families camping nearby, the kind of place where people bring dogs and coolers, not the kind of place where you expect anything strange to happen. They arrived around 4 in the afternoon. The campground was maybe 1/3 full. They saw a few RVs, a couple families cooking dinner, kids riding bikes between campsites. Everything felt normal, safe. They set up their tent, built a fire, cooked some food, and spent most of the evening just relaxing, talking, drinking a little wine, listening to the quiet sounds of the forest around them. Around 11 that night, they decided to go to sleep. The fire had burned low. The temperature was dropping, and the campground had gone mostly quiet. The last thing Priya remembers hearing before falling asleep was someone laughing at a campsite somewhere down the road. Then everything went silent. Priya wasn't sure what time it was when Dana woke her up, but it felt like the middle of the night, the kind of deep darkness where even the trees look like shadows. Dana's hand was still gripping her arm. Neither of them spoke. Priya slowly looked toward the tent door again, and there he was, a man standing about 15 feet away, right at the edge of their campsite. He wasn't moving. He wasn't doing anything. Just standing there, facing their tent. The dying embers of the fire cast a faint orange glow across the ground, just enough light to see his outline. He looked tall, broad shoulders, dark clothing. His face was hidden in shadow. Priya said the stillness was what made the situation so disturbing. If he had been walking through the campsite, or looking for something, or even speaking, it would have felt different, more normal. But he wasn't doing anything. He was just watching. Dana's grip on Priya's arm tightened slightly. Both of them stayed perfectly still, trying not to make a sound. 1 minute passed, then another. Priya said it felt like 10 minutes. Her heart was beating so loudly she was afraid the man outside might hear it. Then finally, the man moved. He slowly turned his head, looked toward the trees behind him, and began walking away. Not quickly, not nervously, just calmly, like he had nowhere else he needed to be. Within a few seconds, he disappeared into the darkness between the trees. The forest swallowed him completely. Priya and Dana didn't sleep after that. Neither of them even sat up. They just lay there, listening, waiting. Every small sound outside made their stomachs twist. Branches moving, leaves shifting, the distant creak of a tree. Each noise made them wonder if the man had come back. But nothing happened. Eventually, the sky began to lighten, and the campground slowly started to wake up. Car doors closing, voices, someone starting a generator somewhere in the distance. When the sun finally rose high enough to illuminate the campsite, Priya and Dana unzipped the tent. They stepped outside cautiously. The campground looked completely normal. Families making breakfast, dogs walking with their owners. Nothing about the scene suggested anything strange had happened during the night. But the feeling in their stomachs hadn't gone away. Later that morning, Priya walked over to speak with the campground host. She described what had happened, the man standing outside their campsite, watching their tent. The host listened quietly, then asked one question. Which direction did he go? Priya pointed toward the trees behind their campsite. The host looked in that direction for a moment, then back at her. His expression had changed. He told her something that made her stomach drop again. The campsites in that direction were empty. That entire section of the campground hadn't been booked that weekend. No campers, no reservations, no one staying there, which meant whoever that man was, he hadn't come from another campsite. Priya and Dana decided to leave shortly after that conversation. They packed their gear quickly, loaded everything into their car, and were almost ready to drive away when Priya noticed something near the edge of their campsite. Footprints, deep ones in the soft dirt, right where the man had been standing. Priya crouched down to look more closely. The prints were large, adult-sized, and very deep, like someone had been standing there for a long time. But something about them didn't make sense. There were no footprints leading toward them, and no footprints leading away, just the two prints where he had been standing. Priya said she stared at them for almost a full minute, trying to figure out how that was possible. But the longer she looked, the more unsettling the realization became. Those footprints meant one thing. The man had been standing there long before Dana woke up, long before Priya opened her eyes, long before either of them realized he was there, watching them sleep. Camping can be unpredictable. Strange sounds, unfamiliar places, and sometimes, people you didn't expect to see. But the final story takes things a step further. Because this time, someone wasn't just watching. They left something behind. Joel said the moment he realized they weren't alone wasn't when he saw the footprints. It wasn't when the food bag moved, and it wasn't even when they found the photograph. It was earlier, much earlier. It was the moment he realized something about the woods around their campsite. The forest wasn't making any noise, no insects, no wind, no animals, just silence. The kind of silence that only happens when something else is already there. Watching. Joel and his younger brother Ryan had planned the trip for months. A 3-day backpacking route in the Appalachian Mountains, 6 miles from the nearest trailhead, no campgrounds, no cabins, no other registered hikers in the area, just wilderness. Joel had done backcountry trips before. Ryan hadn't, but Joel had researched the trail carefully. It was challenging, but manageable. They arrived at the trailhead early in the morning. By mid-afternoon, they had reached the campsite. The location was perfect. A high ridge overlooking a valley, clear sky, tall trees surrounding the area. They set up their tent, built a fire, cooked dinner, and spent the evening watching the sun disappear behind the mountains. The first night was completely normal. No strange sounds, no unusual activity, just the quiet rhythm of the forest. Joel fell asleep feeling confident they had chosen a great location. The next day they went exploring, a side trail loop that would bring them back to camp. They left around noon and returned roughly 4 hours later. When Joel stepped back into the clearing, something felt wrong immediately. The campsite looked exactly the same. Tent zipped, gear where they left it, fire pit untouched. But something about the scene felt different. Joel stood there for a moment, scanning the area, trying to figure out what had changed. Then he saw it. The food bag. They had hung their food in a tree about 40 yards away, standard practice in bear country. But now, the bag was hanging from a different branch. Not dramatically different, just slightly higher, like someone had lowered it, checked inside, and then hung it back up again. Joel walked over and inspected the bag. Nothing was missing. Everything was still inside. Ryan assumed they had simply remembered the branch wrong. Maybe they had hung it there earlier. Joel didn't argue, but something about it bothered him, because Joel knew exactly where he had tied that rope. Later that evening, Joel walked the perimeter of the campsite, something he often did on trips, just checking the area, making sure there were no signs of animals. Near the edge of the trees, in soft soil, he found something. Footprints. Large ones. Boot prints. Not theirs. Joel crouched down and examined them closely. The tread pattern was completely different from their boots. The prints led from the forest, toward the campsite, then back into the trees again. Whoever made them had walked directly through their camp, while they were gone. Joel didn't tell Ryan immediately. They were miles from the trailhead, and it was already getting dark. Leaving that night wasn't realistic. So Joel waited until after dinner, then casually mentioned the footprints. Ryan didn't like that information. Not at all. Neither of them slept well that night. The next morning, they started packing up early. Joel wanted to leave as soon as possible. Ryan was rolling up a sleeping pad when he suddenly froze. Joel. His voice sounded strange. Joel looked up. Ryan was standing near the tree line, staring at the ground. Joel walked over and immediately saw what Ryan was looking at. There was a row of small stones, carefully arranged, perfectly spaced. Someone had placed them there deliberately, and in the center of the stones was something else, a photograph. Joel crouched down slowly, picked it up, and stared at it. It took him a moment to understand what he was looking at. It was their campsite. The photograph had been taken from the trees, through the branches. Joel sitting near the fire. Ryan standing with his back to the camera. The firelight illuminated the entire scene. Joel looked at the photo again. The angle, the lighting, the position of the fire. There was no doubt. The picture had been taken the first night, before the moved food bag, before the footprints. Someone had been there from the very beginning, watching them. Joel didn't hesitate. He looked at Ryan and said one sentence. "We're leaving right now." They packed what they could in under a minute, left most of their gear behind, and started hiking. Fast. Joel forced himself not to run. Running would make noise. Running would make panic worse. But they walked quickly. Neither of them spoke during the entire hike out. Joel kept checking behind them, every few minutes, every time expecting to see someone stepping onto the trail behind them. But he never saw anyone. 6 miles later, they reached the trailhead, got into the car, and drove. For almost an hour, before either of them said anything. Joel later reported the incident to the Park Service. A ranger visited the campsite the following week. They found the abandoned gear. They found the footprints. But the photograph was gone. Someone had gone back and taken it. Joel said that detail is what still bothers him the most. Not the footprints, not even the photograph itself, but the fact that whoever had been watching them came back afterward, like they wanted the picture back, like it meant something to them, like they wanted something to remember them by. Camping is supposed to be peaceful. You leave the city behind. You leave the noise behind. And for a while, it feels like you're completely alone in the woods, just you and the quiet. But sometimes that quiet means something else. Sometimes it means there's no one around to hear you if something goes wrong. 3 camping trips, 3 experiences that none of these people were able to explain. No arrests, no answers. Just the feeling that someone was out there in the dark, watching. And sometimes, that feeling never really goes away. If you've ever had a strange or disturbing experience while camping, hiking, or being outdoors at night, feel free to share it. You can submit your story through the link in the description. I read every submission, and some of them may appear in future videos. Until then, stay safe out there. And if you're planning to go camping anytime soon, sleep lightly, because sometimes you're not the only one out there in the woods.